Okay, so we're going to talk about learning theories today. Now we're going to focus down into three main ones. That's behaviorism, experiential and constructivism. Now the reason we're focusing on all three is because there's numerous theories on there, and I just want to give you a little bit of a background into three of them to give you an idea about what's going on within the lesson. So if we So the bit of background on learning theories. Learning can be defined as the acquisition of a skill or knowledge that is acquired either through practice or study or education in general. Now the reason why we need to know it as coaches, because it allows us to better understand the process of learning by our participants. We can understand how they might best learn, and then structure our drills and the way we interact with our participants in order to meet their needs in terms of learning and safety. But like we said, we're only focusing on those three today: behaviorism, experiential and constructivism. So if we go straight to behaviorism. So this comes from originally from Pavlov, 1902, and what he did is he came up with classical conditioning, where he showed some food to some dogs, and like any good dog, it salivated at the when the food was presented. So this was an unconditioned stimulus. So stimulus just means when you present something. If you think about it in sport terms, it may be the fact that the defender has got too tight to the attacker, and the attacker can realise and sense that stimulus. So they're too tight to him. So what happened when Pavlov was working with these dogs? He actually rang a bell when he presented the food, and he did this over a few days, and then without presenting the food, he just rang the bell, and guess what happened? Well, the dogs drooled. They started salivating just by the sound of that bell. Okay, so he had and this time he had a conditioned stimulus, so he controlled the stimulus and he created the response that he wanted. So that's exactly what's happened here. He rang a bell, he controlled the bell, and he wanted to control the salivating of the dog. Now that's very sort of basic, and sort of taps into sort of the animalistic and human reflexes as well. So B.F. Skinner actually went on to come up with operant conditioning. So this is when there's a controlled response using either reward or punishment. And what he did is that he had a rat in a cage, and when the rat pushed a lever, it got food. In other tests, he electrified the floor, and the only way to stop the floor being electrified was when the rat learned to press the lever. So you had punishment and reward, and you found that both of these worked in order to make the rat push the lever. So now you can see how this might be then used in coaching or education. Examples might be if one of your participants is really good, keeps their head over the ball. Perhaps when they're striking a football, you can say, well done, you kept your head over the ball really well there. So you're praising that specific behaviour. So we've got the controlled response and a specific reward. And now that's what it has to be. Studies have found that it has to be specific in order to elicit the response you want. So you've complimented the head over the ball, so they'll repeat that next time they perform that skill, according to the theory. You've also seen this when people are punished as well. Say, for example, one of your students isn't getting tight to the man they're marking, and the person they're marking is getting lots of space in perhaps basketball. You may then have a go at them or punish them with saying, "What are you doing? I can't believe you're doing that. What do you need to do?" So then that punishment will make them remember that they have to keep tight to that defender in order to defend well. Okay. So that is basically what behaviorism is, and what the basis of education and sports coaching has been for like the last 100 years. So now it's quite basic, and as you can see, all the theory is grounded on studies using dogs and rats. So you need to ask yourself the question: can this apply to complex human individuals? It's an interesting one, something we'll talk about more. Okay, so experiential learning. and this relates to Kolb's learning cycle he developed in 1985. Now, there's a lot of, seems like complicated words there, but if we look at this stage here, so immediate personal experience, this is where you actually do something. So perhaps you might learn how to do some keep-ups. So excuse my awful handwriting. Okay, after you've done them, so it might be the first time you've ever done them, you may then reflect. How did it go? So we had this little guy here, he's got a big question mark over his head. How did that go? What did I find worked well? Perhaps when I locked my ankle out, that's when the ball seemed to stay up in the air and didn't give me backspin. So this is maybe a preferred method. So this guy here, he's then thinking of a new plan. So he's going to keep his ankle locked every time he does keep-ups now. So then, when he comes to doing it again, he's kept his ankle locked and that ball is going up. So excuse me for my awful diagrams there, but as you can see, that's his locked ankle there. Okay, and then it goes back to the start. So he's had that feeling. So you pretty much, you do it, you reflect on it, you come up with a new plan, you put it into action, and then you experience it again. So we have that learning cycle. Now people could enter this cycle at different points. For example, you might begin by reflecting on what you've seen before, or maybe what you've seen on TV. You may be able to ask students, when you watched Orlando Magic play basketball, how did you feel when they did their layups? What were the main key coaching points that they were performing when they performed their layups? I want you to come up with a plan about how you could do that in your game. So they're coming up with their plan, they're going to try it there, and so they've entered the stage, they've entered the cycle at the second stage, come up with a new plan, and then they're actually going in to try it out. So your learners in coaching, they have to be able to have a go at it, they have to be able to reflect on it, they have to be able to come up with a new plan, and then try that out. So those 4 stages have to be in place in order to meet the 4 stages of Kolb's learning cycle. Okay, constructivism. Now this is one that's a little bit more complex, and this is where a learner uses knowledge from their past experiences to learn about new skills, acquisitions, or knowledge. So it says there, teacher. This also applies to coach as well, as you'll find that most of our literature comes from either education or sports psychologists. So this is where your participant may have seen sports before, perhaps as a spectator, or read about coaching, or heard from other coaches or players, and then they've got to use that knowledge to then further themselves and perhaps practice new skills to learn them. So as the coach, you're not actually perhaps directly giving them the answers, but you're going to, what's called, facilitate. So essentially, it is like hand-holding, but you're just gently guiding them through it. And you may have heard of the term guided discovery. This is closely linked into constructivism. So what's going to be an example of this? Perhaps in gymnastics, we have a bar there, we have our participant walking along the bar, and as the big coach, so when you do a big person here, you may be just gently holding their hand so they can use your hand as they walk along the bar. So you're actually scaffolding them within a sports coaching session. So you're gently, if they need you, you're there, but they can walk along the bar. Now, this little bit at the bottom where the formatting's gone wrong, it just says that they need to collaborate with others to organise their knowledge with each other to construct their own knowledge. Okay, so essentially they're working with what's called a more knowledgeable other. Now this social side was done by a guy called Vygotsky. Sociocultural learning theory. Now it sounds complicated, but all it is that learning takes place best when people are learning from someone who is called a more knowledgeable other, someone who has more knowledge. So if we look at the next page that's going to give us examples of how all the different things work, we'll see how the best way this could go about. So as a coach, you might give a scenario that requires deep thought and thinking from a small group of participants, but you know in those groups you've put an experienced player who can then pass on their knowledge and explain it to his peers. Because you'll often find that the most learning takes place is when one participant is actually teaching another one. As in order to teach something, you have to deeply understand it. So therefore your participants will have a deeper understanding of the skill as they then relate it to their peers, and so they can understand it. So if we look now at the next example, putting it all together. So we have our behaviorism. We've talked about the keeping your head over the ball there with a specific praise. You also may punish. You may have seen this in coaching sessions or at school. Very, very simplistic, or what's called reductive, which means it's been reduced down to very animalistic behaviour. Whereas these two here are a bit more complex and take into account humans who socialise with one another are more likely to learn better. So if we look at this first one here, this example, one attacker versus one defender in basketball. So they've had a go at the attacker trying to take on the defender. You then give them 30 seconds to think about why they didn't go past him. Come up with a new plan about what you could try. You can perhaps maybe give in some ideas. Maybe if you try dropping the shoulder, faking to go one way and then going the other, you might get past him. Or constructivism is when you construct your own knowledge through past experience and collaborating with others. You have 3 versus 5 in hockey. So you've got 3 defenders and they need to hold off 5 attackers. You've given a mixed ability group, but within that group you have your MKO. So remember what that stands for? If not, rewind back and find out. You then have you give them a whiteboard and say, right, I'm going to give you 1 minute to come up with a strategy to prevent the group of 5 attackers from scoring in your goal. Now, and then you might encourage that MKO. So so you put an experienced defender in those little groups of 3, so they can relate their knowledge of past experiences, of their previous skills that they already have. So essentially, they become the teacher. So you've actually got the participants teaching each other, teaching themselves. And this is, at the moment, being considered the holy grail of coaching and education. And the FA are developing this through their FA Youth Award modules 1, 2 and 3. So, what I'd like you to do, just a tiny bit of homework. I want you to find a YouTube link, and I want you to email it to me that illustrates one of these 3 theories, or if you want, find a whole new theory that you want. So I've got Bandura there, which is his social learning theory. You've got Skinner as behaviorism, same with Pavlov, but also you can look up people like Maslow and his what's called hierarchy of needs. Now I'm drawing a triangle here, not might make sense to you, but once you find out about Maslow, that'll make a lot more sense. Okay, so just find a quick YouTube link, and this is going to be resources that we use for a task in class. So you can please get those to me, and also make sure that you have a copy of them and perhaps on your email as well. Okay, thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to seeing all of you in lesson.